You're like a big propeller for women in leadership.
Often men want to be allies, but they don't know how to be allies.
We tend to give patriarchy too much credit.
Why can't she just be a great CEO, damn it, right?
Like women show up for women a lot less than we expect them to. Ghibli controversy. This is what happened with industrialization or globalization.
As a part of that weaving tradition, they weaved prayers into the cloth. We didn't even give the creator of Ghibli Studio that choice.
Hi everyone, welcome to another episode on the Product Street. Today I'm joined by someone whose work I've admired from a distance for a while now. Prachi, welcome to the Product Street.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm super excited to have you here. But of course, I will let you tell your story yourself.
So as you know, I work with Microsoft. I lead a small studio team, design research. I'm a part of Microsoft Commerce.
Wait a minute.
So apparently, my most loyal viewers are also my most unsubscribed ones. Wow, love that for me. But hey, if you accidentally click on that subscribe button, I won't stop you. All right, let's get to the good stuff before this gets embarrassing.
What that basically means is every time someone transacts with Microsoft, and we're talking enterprise, right, not consumer, in a sense like the financial nerve center of Microsoft, because these systems can be down. Also, these are very legacy systems because you touch like one thing and you don't know what are the repercussions, that will happen in so many other places. We were sort of brought in about three years back because our leadership decided that we should look at how to transform these systems so that it sort of stays relevant, right? And it helps Microsoft serve its customers better. But it's sort of like changing parts of the engine on a flying plane. And this is what we do on a day-to-day basis. I've been in Microsoft 8 years. Primarily, a lot of work that I've done is in the Microsoft sales space. Prior to that, I started my journey as a front-end developer. This was about 20 years back. This was also pre-Google.
Right.
And it was really fascinating because, from a simple notepad, you could publish things on a browser and you could just make it available to everybody. So I thought that was like a new superpower I have found. And it was very, very exciting. Now that we have this power of publishing, how do we make this technology easy for people? There was a lot of this thinking of, how do I get a user to click on that banner, apply for that loan, and things like that. So that really fascinated me, like this whole sort of psyche of users. My first project was for Motorola. And me being me, did a complete heuristic evaluation, even though no one had asked me to do it, and led the entire UI testing for that. And this was like really my first job, right? So my PM, he took my case to this head of the user experience team there, saying that, maybe this person can be a better part of your team. I remember that other person being a little skeptical at that point in time because I didn't have like any design background, or at that point they used to look at people from advertising or marketing, right? Because there weren't like a lot of product designers. But I was like, give me a chance. And that's when my journey started. And then serendipitously, I became at that point what is called an information architect. Started consulting. Then I spent about 7-8 years there. Mostly in the financial space. I've consulted with Citibank and JP Morgan Chase and AIG and all of those, like the Wall Street companies. Then moved to TCS because TCS, being a services company, they had created a lot of IP when they were providing services to their customers, right? And they wanted to productize it. And they wanted to set up like a product experience COE, which could look at like how do you combine this IP into meaningful products. So that started my journey as a founder of user experience team. So setting up a team from scratch, growing it, building it. That's something I did for 7-8 years. And then at some point, I think there were about, I was leading 150 people. Though not directly, but very diverse groups of people. And I was like, what the heck am I doing? Because, of course, the more you sort of rise, the more you lose touch with reality on the ground, right? And I think a lot of us go through that as a part of a midlife crisis, that what am I doing? Am I really making an impact? All those kinds of things. Um, so I did something again quite radical. 8 years back, I joined Microsoft as a senior user experience designer, which was about like, I think 3 levels down, IC role. Um, Also, I think the other reason I joined Microsoft was when I came here to be interviewed. The person who was interviewing me, I met the kids, and the kids seemed to have very good schools. Like they were doing a lot of these extracurricular activities like MUMs and things like that. And I was like, I want that for my children. So I think a lot of the career decisions again have been influenced by kids, which is another thing. Since we're going to talk about women, I tell women that women think differently, right? We may not always think in terms of the corporate ladder. Sometimes it's a lot of other factors, like how do I provide a better life for my family? How do I have a better work-life balance? Which maybe men don't think about as much. I thought I was doing a very noble thing because I would go back to the basics, work at the grassroots level, work as a hands-on designer. But that's when I also realized that if you want to make impact, you have to be in a position of power. And it was a great learning. And of course, as luck would have it, because my core strengths were what they were, I could, like, again, change roles and things like that. But it's been a very interesting journey in Microsoft, because starting as an IC senior designer to moving into a full-fledged research role, which was not something I had exposure to before, because I've never worked as a pure researcher, and working with like people who were PhDs from some of the best Ivy League colleges in the world. My entire team was in the US. I was the only researcher there. So there were like moments of doubt, right? Imposter syndrome. Like, what am I even doing here? But I realized it's all good, because end of the day, it doesn't matter what your pedigree is. It just matters, how much impact you can make to the product, right? I think I was able to demonstrate that pretty reasonably. And so here I am now leading a studio team in Microsoft.
Wow, thank you so much for that. I love how your story is so uniquely grounded and all the pivots, right? I have a huge regard for people who've got like a lot of pivots, because it shows how you've adapted over the times and still staying true to your skills, because there's a unique path that you're choosing, and that really speaks to me.
I think that's the reality of life, right? Like when we were growing up, our parents used to tell us that, okay, study now, so that you can enjoy later. I tell my kids there's nothing like enjoy later, because you have to study all your life. Like, I'm almost hitting 50s now and I'm learning AI. And I think it's the most fascinating thing, like, especially for our generation, that, we have so much opportunity to learn and reinvent ourselves.
That's true. And I also know you're like a big propeller for women in leadership. So maybe we'll start with something closer to home. You've had this incredible journey, right? So what do you think are some visible and invisible challenges that women face in leadership?
Let's actually start from home, right? Because so I run an allyship initiative across Microsoft IDC, which is grounded for towards women. And one of the questions that I get asked the most is, haven't we reached that equality yet? Why do you need like initiative for women specifically? When we talk about diversity and inclusion, there are so many different facets to it, right? So why single out women? Whenever I walk into a room full of people, even now actually, and I ask, how many of you are single and how many of you are married? And for the women who are married, how many of you have had to actually discuss this with your husband or your future in-laws, that do I continue working in my current job, right? To this date, all hands will go up. Maybe the conversations have changed. Maybe it's not about should I even be working or not, but take the case of people around you. The husband is working in a different city, the wife is working in a different city. Who's expected to leave the job, right? So because all of these things are like so deeply conditioned, that we just take them for granted. I'll share another very common example, right? Let's say there's a family where the husband drives his vehicle and the wife drives her vehicle, right? And they both like commute to work. Now, if there's a family outing where the husband, wife, and the kids are going out, by default, who's assumed to be the driver? Right? Most of the times it's the man. And like nobody even thinks about it, right? Because that's how we are conditioned. And a lot of these are biases that are so deeply ingrained in us that it's just like, as Daniel Kahneman calls it, right? It's the default systems one thinking. Um, the ability to step back and question those biases is, I think, what we really need in the workspaces. There was a survey by McKinsey, and they do this, I think, Women in Workspace survey every year, where they ask senior men, do you think that there are biases in the workspace towards women? And 9 out of 10 men think there aren't any, right? So I think it all starts from that. It all starts from awareness. So coming back to your question, right, about what are the challenges women face, I think it's both the males, the men, and the women. We have been conditioned into behaving in certain ways, right? When we raise our daughters, right, we teach them to be respectful, we teach them to be soft spoken, we teach them to be well behaved, we teach them to be safe, we teach them to not be too visible, right? And all of these characteristics carry on in the workspace. And these are exactly the things that will not let you grow in the workspace, right? Because if you're playing safe, if you're not, they say that, okay, don't speak up when elders are talking, right? So that, of course, gets transliterated to the workspace where, if there is like a heated discussion, how many women will actually speak up without doubting themselves? So a lot of these biases have to be reversed. And that's where allyship comes in, right? Because if the men can understand what are these challenges which are stopping women from growing, and not because they are less in any way, but just because they are socially conditioned in a particular way, they can be great allies. Often men want to be allies, but they don't know how to be allies. So you're working, you would have probably experienced this. You're in a room and a woman at the table is trying to make a point. She's not being heard. Sometime later, the man will say the exact same thing. And he'll say it because he's trying to help her or trying to make her heard. But now all the attention is focused on the man, and people are listening, and people are saying, oh, wow, what a great idea. And that woman does not get credit, right? So one of the things, for example, we coach as a part of allyship is, don't do that. Instead, use the voice that you have to deflect the attention back to the woman. See that I think she's trying to say something. I think she has a point to make. And, give her that space to be heard. There are certain biological reasons also. Apparently, the voice of men, like the baritone, that's more tuned for the human ear, so people will like listen and take notice. Whereas a woman's voice, typically being soft or high pitched or whatever, may not garner that kind of attention, right? These are some limitations that nature has given us. But if we have to really foster equality in the workspace, we need privileged people like the men in the room to help those women be heard. So yeah, it starts from there.
That makes sense. In fact, I've been sort of trying to battle this topic with myself for a while now, but I've also got a slightly different angle to it. I feel like we so often talk about rooms not being designed for women, but it's also true that men are also figuring out visibility or influence in their own ways. So sometimes I do feel like it's less of a gendered challenge, but more of a human one, a more social one. And I'm not saying patriarchy is not there, but I do feel that sometimes we tend to give patriarchy too much credit. For in our I mean, it's our mindset that happens to be the first barrier to things. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Take an example of a man who's coming from maybe a rural background, doesn't speak English very well, and trying to make it in corporate life. They're going to have their struggles. Take a woman who's from a similar background, similarly doesn't know the language, and trying to make it big. For the woman, the challenges are 10x, right? Because, yes, on one level, the man and the woman are sort of battling the same thing, but that woman also comes with the baggage of being a woman. Already, she's being perceived in a certain way, right? Um, so that's another conversation that we have often in these allyship groups because, see, I mean, whatever said and done, we still have that little bit of a colonial mindset, right? We're not maybe as liberated as our Western counterparts. So a lot of men, of course, have had to struggle, their own struggles to make it big in the corporate life. And the question they ask is, if I did it, why does the woman need special privileges or special powers? Because she has a lot more handicaps because of the social conditioning, because of the way she has been taught to behave, right? And this starts from very early childhood. Look at playgrounds, right? The boys are running wild, the girls are taught to look after themselves, play safe. I have done that with my 7 8 year old kids, that hey, make sure that your frock is covering your legs, right? And we do it with good intentions, but we do it. So I think that's also something that we are women of privilege, right? I mean, the fact that we're sitting here and having this conversation, but we really need to go out there and talk to lot more people to understand that maybe there's a handful of women who are privileged yet not so privileged as men, and there are a lot many women who are just struggling to be seen, to be heard, to be permitted to work, to be permitted to have an education, you know, constantly being asked to put their children first, their family first. A lot of these things men have not had to deal with.
To look at it from another side, do you also maybe think that women vouch for women or women show up for women a lot less than we expect them to? Is that something that you've seen happen around you, or have you experienced something differently?
I don't think I can make sweeping statements because I really don't have data to back this up. But I think it is, to an extent, true. And the reason I say that is because the allyship program that I run, right? A part of it is also having women mentors on board who can mentor the allies and sort of share their life stories in one-on-one situations, or if an ally is trying to figure out how to be a better ally, or they're going through a particular situation, they have this woman as a sounding board. So part of this work that I do around allyship also includes recruiting women to the program, right? And I was initially surprised by the kind of resistance that women showed there, because they didn't want to be perceived as someone who's taking advantage of their gender to be a part of these programs. There was this thing about, I've never faced any inclusion issues, so I don't think I like really resonate with that. However, what I think a lot of women don't realize, and that's where they have to be a little bit sensitive, is you may not realize that it's an inclusion issue, but it is. So, a classic example is when your manager is being protective and not giving you difficult assignments because it will include like staying out of home for a long time, or dealing with difficult people, or handling conflict, being aggressive, and because you're presumed to be like this nice person, you don't get those opportunities. But people who get those opportunities grow. So you think that people are being nice to you, but if you look at it from your career standpoint, you're actually being excluded, right?
Have there been instances in your career where you were in that position?
Not in the sense of being excluded because of these kinds of reasons, but yes, I have been a part of many discussions. I still am today, unfortunately, where there'll be a lot of talking. I am trying to say something and I can't get that word in, right? Or people are talking about things which are like perceived sort of more male, where they're talking about investment or cricket or strategy. And they will not think that I have anything to offer to the conversation, right? So I'm like generally passed over in those conversations. And that is a very common phenomena in corporate life, unfortunately.
Right. Especially when you're in an environment where someone's superior to you, or like you mentioned, like your manager trying to be protective of you so that you're not exposed to some harsher environments, just in like, in like a good intention.
Yeah, there's a word for it, right? It's called condescending.
Right. So when women realize that they're in circumstances like that, what do you think they can do to, break that sort of invisible barrier and make sure they are going beyond that?
Yeah, I'll reframe your question actually, right? Because the onus should not be on the victim to
Okay.
change the society, because they just sort of trying to get a life, and deal with it on a day-to-day basis. And this is not just me talking about women, right? But if you talk about any kind of disparities, be it gender disparity, be it racial disparity, be it like socioeconomic disparity, one of the things that we expect as a society is that the victims should change the world, the oppressed should change the world, right? That cannot happen. And that's why you need allies.
Right, right. But I'm just curious, do you think there are instances where women tend to victimize themselves a lot more in the pretext that, for example, though the topic about being in the same room as women and there's a conversation going and men are talking about, say, cricket. Let's take cricket. It's IPL's going on, so it's hard. But I think there's a barrier in thinking if will they be willing to listen to me. I'm a woman, I'm not conditioned to be liking cricket or watching cricket, so will they think I can have a say here? So I think it's firstly a mental barrier of sorts, because a lot of times I've seen my peers also where they like preempt the obstacle way before it actually happens, that they're robbing themselves of the opportunity to go for it.
True. So I'll sort of again go back to allies, right? And the ally doesn't have to be a male. I mean, a woman
Right.
can be an ally as well. But just, I think, giving people a safe space to be their authentic selves, right? To be heard, to not be diminished because of who they are, is a culture that has to come in organizations. And there are people who do that, right? It's just that it's not yet the norm, because people can get away by being exclusionary. Right. So I'll give you a very simple example. One of my bosses in my current role is a very strong ally, and I have learned so much from him by looking at the way he does things. So when I was fairly new in this organization, and I was surrounded by a lot of people who were like 20 years into the space, right? They knew all the nitty-gritties of the space. And when I come in as a user researcher, I am telling them things that they probably don't want to hear about, right? So being a woman and then also being a researcher and saying that, hey, there are all these different things which are wrong with the system that you guys have built over 20 years. It's not easy. So one of the small things that this manager used to do was, when we were in a meeting and people had like different points of view, so everybody's telling, at the end of it, he would call out by name every person who's been quiet in the discussion and ask them if they have something to say, right? It does take those 5-7 minutes extra of his time. And if he didn't do it, nobody would like blame him for it, because nobody does it, right? But being mindful and taking that time to include people. Another example is a friend of mine was telling me this, that they were in the US in the head office, and one of the sort of super bosses walked in, right? So everybody formed a circle around this person, and they were like all trying to sort of talk to him, right? And then there were a few people on the fringes who were not a part of that main circle. Yeah. And someone mindfully said that, hey, let's expand the circle to include these people, right? Mm-hmm. It's such a small yet such a powerful gesture of just being more inclusive. So I think this is something that all of us in positions of privilege, irrespective of our gender, have to think about. How do we expand the circle? Because to your point, if we are able to expand the circle, we will hear those diverse voices, which we may never hear otherwise.
Because that constantly makes me think, do we as women always have to wait for that space where someone can provide to us so we can speak up? Do we have to wait for someone else to come and say that, hey, let's expand the circle so that women can come in? Because is someone really stopping us if we want to take that step forward and make ourselves included?
So yes, we are also stopping ourselves. I will not say no to that. But, just saying something like, oh, no, you need to overcome those internal things that are pulling you down. That's easier said than done.
Yes.
And it helps a lot when you have an ally.
Right.
You have a mentor, you have a sponsor. Sponsorship is another thing that a lot of women shy from asking, right?
Someone advocating for you.
Yeah, someone advocating for you, and that someone being in a position of power to be able to advocate for you, right? It's seen as being too sort of demanding or being too assertive, bordering on aggressive. So we were having one of these discussions in our organization around sponsorship, and someone said a very beautiful thing, right? So this was the question that was posed to them, that, hey, how should women go looking for sponsors, right? So they said it's the responsibility of the sponsors, because it's like really hard for women to go and ask someone to sponsor them. Now, it's again easier said that, they need to overcome their mental biases and all, but just look at the conditioning, right? Something that you've been taught from a very young age, that like, don't put yourself first, put others first, right? So deeply ingrained. Because I have two daughters, I try doing these experiments at home too. So my younger daughter, she's about 15 now. And from the age of like 7, 8, I've consciously tried to teach her to not necessarily be subdued because of things like someone is older to you or someone is, in a position of authority. If you don't agree, challenge it respectfully. So often we will have these dinner table conversations where my husband says something and she doesn't agree with it, and she has her own point of view. And because, of course, my husband also has the traditional conditioning, he'll get upset and he'll be like, how can she talk to me like that, right? So these are also like little frictions at home. But if we don't, if we shy away from it, then how are we going to really raise our next generation of girls to be more equipped than we were and not spend years and years unlearning those social biases? So parents have a huge responsibility too.
That's true. I like how you said unlearning a lot of things, because if you look at history, right, a lot of women who did unconventional things that people often did not expect them to. Like, let's take history, for example. We've got people like Rani Lakshmibai or like Sarojini Naidu. Nobody paved the red carpet for them and said, hey, come, take the front seat, lead us towards this change.
True.
But I think they were some people who did not place all the cards in somebody else's hands, and they felt responsible for their own initiatives, for their own thoughts. And I think that really does make a huge, definitely allies are like a great must-haves, because it's true. When allies are in a position to support women, then it's easier for women to unlearn things and then come forward. Right. So I agree with you in that.
Yeah. But see, like even these examples that you gave, right? I was thinking as you were talking about it. Again, things are so ingrained in us that we'll have that pretext of, oh, being a woman, she was so brave. Being a woman, though, she was whatever, she did that. Like even now, when we're talking about Indra Nooyi, we say, oh, such a fabulous woman CEO. Why can't she just be a great CEO, damn it, right? Like,
oh yeah.
Some like very good things you can try on the internet, right? So there's this one test where it's supposed to be like a time box thing, 2 minutes or 3 minutes, and they will rapidly throw these roles at you, right? So there's a doctor, engineer, mechanic, whatever, and you have to categorize them in genders, right? Try it out, because I thought I was very liberated, and I tried it out, and the results came out very biased, right? There were like only about 30% of the roles that I was able to classify as female and 70% as male, because That's how we instantly think. So even for
Yes.
women, right? We have to unlearn.
That's true. I mean, I also think it's happening a little bit. Of course, we have a long way to go, but you see how batsmen are now being just called batters.
True.
You know, I think changes like these are coming about.
And language, by the way, is very powerful, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we've seen that with LLMs, like
Oh, yes.
how they've sort of changed the whole way we look at technology, just surely through language. I mean, at the end of it, an LLM is not really a search, right? It's just a generation. It's just a autocomplete. But some of the amazing things that we saw there are grounded in language. So language really informs the society.
Yes, yes, it constructs a lot of spaces, if we can say that. All right, now I just want to shift gears a little bit and talk about something that's hot today before it goes out full on warm. But it's the Ghibli controversy. I think people just went crazy about, just generating Ghibli images and all of that. And here's what I think is not fair, though, is how people who just want to participate are being called out for, hey, how dare you use or, mimic Ghibli to, recreate your images or something like that. Whereas I think the real question should be, what systems can we create to make sure that these tools, while they're mimicking creators, how can we make sure these systems are also remembering those creators or rewarding those creators? Because it's true that millions of tech companies today are doing this. They are using millions of creators' actual work without giving them credit and to build these tools. But if you actually look at it, going back to history, I don't know why I'm taking so many history examples today, but this is what happened with industrialization or globalization. There were so many skilled workers who made things from scratch. They make their own clothes, they made their own shoes, they made their own furnitures. Okay, maybe not their own furnitures, but there were people who were so skilled in these kind of roles that they were weavers, they were carpenters, they were blacksmiths. And there was so much that went into their work, right? It was slow, but it was also very personal and unique. And then came industrialization and factories and machines. Now, things that these guys took so long and so intimately create were so quickly just replaced by machines who could just roll these same things, replicating them exactly, doing that a lot more faster, and also doing them in bulk. So this really put these skilled craftsmen at a disadvantage, because it was great for it was great for businesses, it was great for consumers, but for the skilled workers, it was devastating. And I think that's what's happening to this art as we see it today. So what's your read on this?
So I think the example that you gave is what a lot of us are talking about, right? It's out there front and center, because now we see that the scale at which AIs can operate is like maybe 1,000x times more than the impact of industrial revolution. I think ultimately it's a question of choice also, right? So when you say that AI has to use, the way it's built, it is using the work of millions of creators of the internet. So at least give them credit. Okay, the genie is out of the bottle, right? You can't really undo it. But we didn't even give the creator of Ghibli Studio that choice, right? Apparently, he didn't want AI to use his work. What are the kinds of guardrails that we are putting in place for people to even have that choice, right? Are we just assuming that their offering is there for the world to consume, and as long as you give them credit and as long as you give them money, it's okay? Maybe it's not. Right?
Yeah.
So I think that's probably what, from a technology perspective, these are not really hard things, right? If you have to build some guardrails to not infringe on other people's right, or to respect their IP, or use it in a way that is based on their consent and how they want to do it. I think those are all aspects of responsible AI that we need to start building in, right? And see, that is where people like us, designers, researchers, the community which professes to advocate for humans really comes into picture. And I honestly don't think they're doing a great job, right? Because there's a lot of, I mean, it's like a torrent of AI, right? Like this fascinating new technology, fascinating possibilities, and they are fascinating, by the way. But at the same time, you really need this empowered group of people who can stand up and ask these tough questions. So Microsoft has this responsible AI team, which is run by this very dynamic lady called Dr. Mihaela Warvino. And if you follow her on LinkedIn, right, she's asking those tough questions. And I really respect Microsoft for creating that culture where one of its top leaders can, on social media, question the legitimacy of AI. They've recently published a research paper which talks about how generative AI inhibits critical thinking and how people tend to over rely on responses from co-pilots, for example, where even though maybe the technology is hallucinating, because it is citing so many different sources, and if it's giving like a very grammatically correct answer, you just believe that answer is true. I think that's like a very fascinating field that especially researchers and designers should start looking into and start thinking about how can they get that thought process in their individual product groups, in their individual teams, and be that person who still advocates for the humans, because that's, I keep telling my team that we're not designers or researchers. We are product makers and we are advocates of humans and humanity and the planet, right? So our job is to represent these voices in what are essentially engineering, technology, or profit conversations. Because if we don't advocate for humans, who will? Design schools need to empower the kids who are coming out in the industry with these skills, not Figma skills, right? But unfortunately, I am not seeing a lot of these conversations in the community. I think people like you should spark these conversations.
See, things like handicrafts, things like personal, those skilled workers still exist. There are still craft
Correct.
people who
Correct.
still do that. But right today, they're often commoditized because they're so rare, because they're so precious, because there's so much that goes into it.
Or they are inaccessible, right? Like
Or
not
they're
everybody can afford a Hermes bag.
Exactly. Yes. So it's quite interesting that maybe it is true that we have to take things into our hands and then see how we can vouch for it.
The natural tendency is to look at things either with this lens of dystopia or with this lens of utopia, right? We need to find the middle ground. So going back to your example of industrial revolution, the other day we were talking about it, right? That there were these people who wove muslin cloth, and as a part of that weaving tradition, they weaved prayers into the cloth. So every piece of cloth was used for a particular ceremony, or it had its own sort of utility. And that got lost because of industrialization. Now, at that time, the situation was a little different because we were a colony and we didn't really, have a say in that sense, right? But today we are one of the most vibrant democracies and also at the cutting edge of technology. What stops us from giving these creators a seat at the table so that they may influence the outcome of this technology?
Yes.
Right? So instead of things being commoditized, why not make things beautiful by federating this technology out to all of these people? And I think in that sense, some of that is happening, right? Just a few days back, I was trying out this GitHub agent. And about a year back, if someone told me that, AI can take your design mocks and make it into well-structured code,
Right.
exactly like what is there in your Figma,
Yeah.
I would have said impossible. And I saw it with my own eyes about a week back, and impressive job just with text prompts. So you basically plug in a screenshot and you say that, create a coded UI based on the screenshot I've given you. It does a very good job. What does that mean? It means that as a non-techie, I now have the superpower of creating code without knowing how to code necessarily, right? And I can now use that power in so many different ways. If you talk about AI helping the blind see, it's a superpower that we're getting, right? So we're all getting these superpowers, which means that we probably have to let go of some of the things that we do, but then think about how do we utilize these new superpowers that we have,
Yes.
right? Whether you're a weaver, whether you're a technician, whether you're a housewife, a parent, right? This technology is democratizing some superpowers for all of us. We can be scared and we can sort of run away from it, or we can embrace it and be a part of a community that is helping the greater good with this technology. The choice is ours. See, there are going to be a lot of capitalist forces at the end of the day who are going to, try to figure out how to make money out of it or how to gain power out of it, right? But it does not have to be that way. If we, especially as designers, as researchers, as people who are occupying these powers of privilege of decision making or even gatekeeping in the IT space, can first of all start asking these questions, can start bringing that angle of, hey, how is this serving humanity at large, right? And make those voices heard. So I think there's a middle ground. As Monica Bielskety says, right, there is a possibility of protopia where we can actually have technology which is in harmony with the bionic world and create a better future for our future generations. Maybe small acts that we do today are going to go a long way in doing that. But we have to shed that mentality. Like, I have a lot of designer friends who will say, oh, there are certain things, there are certain requirements we will not question because they're coming from business, they're coming from the big boss, right? So you just assume that things have to be done in a particular way. But if you don't ask questions, there is no one else who is gatekeeping the technology to figure out that it is serving humanity, it is serving greater good. So it is everybody's job to do that.
And that's Prachi for you. Prachi, this was such a pleasure having you over. I love how candid you were and the thoughts that you shared openly. I can't wait to steal some of that in my future conversation.
Thank you so much for having me.
But yeah,